The little daughter of the cleaner saw the millionaire unconscious on the floor. And what happened next? Subscribe to the channel and comment where you are watching from. The rain was pounding violently against the windows of the 13th floor of the most imposing office building in Manhattan. Julia Smith was wiping the dark mahogany table with precise and silent movements, her brown eyes attentive to every detail of the luxurious presidential office. At 35, she carried the weight of someone who learned early on that life didn't give second chances to those who let their guard down. "Mum, can I draw here?" The sweet voice of Emma echoed through the sophisticated space. The 6-year-old girl was sitting on the Italian marble floor, her little legs crossed as she organized the colored pencils she always carried in her faded pink backpack. "Of course, my love, but stay quiet, okay? The man who works here might come in at any moment." Julia smiled at her daughter, adjusting a rebellious strand of her own brown hair that had escaped from her bun. She knew she shouldn't have brought Emma to the office, but the school had let the kids out early due to the storm, and she had no one to leave the girl with. Richard Miller's office was a perfect reflection of his personality, imposing, organized, and intimidating. Bookshelves filled with economics and art books stretched from floor to ceiling. Paintings by masters of Brazilian art adorned the walls, and a panoramic view of Manhattan completed the scene of power. Julia knew every object in that environment. She knew exactly where each document, each pen, and each coffee stain on the main table was located. "Mom, this painting is by Di Cavalcanti, right? Just like the one in the book you showed me at the library." Emma pointed to a canvas depicting dancers, her eyes shining with genuine curiosity. Julia stopped cleaning and looked at her daughter with pride and surprise. "How do you know that, my princess?" "You taught me, remember? You said he painted the Brazilian people with a lot of love." The girl returned to drawing, focused on reproducing the vibrant colors she saw around her. This was one of the things that made Julia the proudest. Even working as a cleaning assistant, she never stopped stimulating Emma's intelligence. On her days off, they would go to the public library, where Julia would read stories and show art books to her daughter. It was her way of ensuring that the girl had access to the knowledge she herself had been forced to abandon. At 18, Julia was in her 3rd semester of education at City College when she discovered she was pregnant. The boyfriend, a young man from a middle-class family studying engineering, disappeared as soon as he learned about the pregnancy. "I'm not ready to be a father," were his last words before blocking her phone number and vanishing. Julia had to drop out of college to work and support the daughter growing in her womb. "I won't let you go without my daughter," she murmured to her belly every night, caressing the bump with hands that were already starting to harden from heavy labor. Now, 7 years later, she had built a decent life for the two of them. The 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn was simple but clean and organized. Emma attended a public school that, despite its limitations, had dedicated teachers. And the job at Richard Miller's company, though demanding, paid well and offered transportation and meal vouchers. "Mum, it's thundering really loudly." Emma lifted, her eyes from her drawing, a bit startled by the deafening noise coming from the sky. "It's just a passing rain, sweetheart. It'll stop soon." Julia tried to reassure her daughter, even though she herself was worried about the intensity of the storm. The news had warned about flooding in the city, and she hoped the bus that would take them back home was still running. She finished organizing the papers on the table and moved on to cleaning the executive bathroom. It was an environment that always impressed her: Carrara marble, golden faucets, a mirror that covered the entire wall. "This man probably earns in a month what I earn in 5 years, she thought, without envy, just with the cold realization of reality. Richard Miller was an enigmatic figure in the building. Julia sometimes saw him from afar, always in a perfectly tailored suit, speaking on the phone with a firm and authoritative voice. The employees respected him, but they also feared him. He had lost his wife and young son in a car accident 5 years ago, and since then he had become even more closed off and dedicated solely to work. "The company is all I have left," he had once said to his lawyer, unaware that Julia was cleaning the room next door and could hear the conversation through the slightly open door. The pain in his voice was palpable, and Julia felt a pang of compassion for that man who had everything materially but carried a profound loneliness. "Mom, why is there an ambulance down there?" Emma had approached the window and was watching the movement on the street. "It must be because of the rain, my love. Sometimes accidents happen when it rains a lot." Julia gathered the cleaning supplies, preparing to leave. It was almost 7 in the evening, and she wanted to get home before the storm worsened. But when she headed for the door of the presidential office to say goodbye to Emma, she heard a strange noise coming from inside the main office. A muffled sound, as if something had fallen. "Emma, did you hear that?" "Hear what, Mom?" "It must have been my imagination." Julia took her daughter's hand and headed for the elevator. But something was bothering her. A maternal intuition, perhaps, or just the feeling that something was wrong. "Mom, wait." Emma let go of her hand and ran back down the hallway. "I forgot my blue pencil." "Emma, come back. We can buy another one." "Pen!" But the girl had already entered the presidential office. Seconds later, a sharp scream echoed through the empty floor. "Mom, come here quickly!" Julia's heart raced. She ran down the marble corridor, her sneakers making noise on the silent floor. When she entered the room, she found Emma standing next to the desk, trembling, pointing behind the massive furniture. Richard Miller lay on the floor, unconscious, his face pale and his breathing irregular. Next to him, a small vial of insulin had rolled across the floor. "My God!" Julia knelt beside him, checking his pulse as she had learned in a first aid course years ago. "Emma, grab the phone on the desk and dial 911. Tell them it's an emergency." Julia's hands trembled as she checked if Richard was breathing. His skin was cold and clammy, clear signs of a severe hypoglycemic crisis. She recalled her first aid lessons. In the case of a diabetic fainting, the person could die if not treated quickly. "Hello? It's an emergency. There's a man passed out here in the building in Manhattan." Emma spoke on the phone with impressive maturity for her 6 years. "That's right, my princess. Give them the address on the door." Julia continued to monitor Richard's breathing while waiting for the paramedics. The rain continued to pour outside, and she prayed that the ambulance would arrive in time. "Is he going to be okay, Mom?" Emma approached, still holding the phone. "Yes, my love. You were very brave." Julia hugged her daughter quickly, keeping her eyes on Richard. "You saved his life." At that moment, looking at the most powerful man she knew lying vulnerable on the cold floor, Julia had no idea that this rainy March afternoon would forever change the fate of the 3 of them. That 14 months later, she would no longer be just the woman who cleaned that office, but someone who would become part of that man's life in ways she could never imagine. The sound of the ambulance siren echoed down below, blending with the sound of the rain and announcing the beginning of a journey that would test the limits of pride, gratitude, and love. St. Luke's Hospital smelled of disinfectant and anxiety. Richard Miller slowly awakened, his eyes adjusting to the bright light of the private room. His head throbbed, and a feeling of emptiness filled his stomach. He tried to remember what had happened, but the last few hours were a confusing blur in his memory. "Mr. Miller, how are you feeling?" Dr. Henry Thompson, the endocrinologist who had been treating him for 3 years, approached the bed with a serious expression. "You had a severe hypoglycemic crisis. It could have been fatal if you hadn't been helped in time." Richard furrowed his brow, trying to organize his fragmented thoughts. "I was in the office, working late, but I can't remember anything else." Someone called the ambulance, a child, according to the paramedics. The doctor consulted the medical record. "Mr. Miller, I need to be direct. You are not properly managing your diabetes. Your glucose levels were dangerously low. When was the last time you ate?" Richard closed his eyes, trying to remember. He had only had coffee early in the afternoon, too focused on analyzing the quarterly reports to think about eating. "I don't know. Maybe at lunch yesterday." "That's unacceptable. You have a company to run, employees who depend on you. You can't afford to be negligent with your own health." Dr. Henry made some notes. "I'm going to adjust your medication, but this will only work if you follow a strict eating routine." 3 days later, Richard returned to the office with a strange feeling of vulnerability. He had built an empire based on total control of finances, employees, strategic decisions. But he couldn't control his own body, and that deeply disturbed him. "Good morning, Mr. Miller. How are you feeling?" Mary, his secretary for 8 years, greeted him with a concerned smile. The whole team was very shaken. "You gave us quite a scare." "I'm fine, Mary. Where are the internal audit reports?" Richard avoided the subject, heading directly to his office. He stopped at the door, observing the environment that had been the scene of his near-death experience. Everything was immaculate, as always, but something felt different. On his desk, he found a small bottle of water and a sandwich wrapped in foil, with a handwritten note. "To remind you to eat. Cleaning team." Richard held the note for a few seconds, a strange feeling washing over his chest. How long had it been since someone had shown genuine care for him? Since the death of Helena and little Gabriel, he had shielded himself against any display of affection, considering them signs of weakness or interest in his money. "Mary, who is responsible for cleaning my office?" "It's Julia, sir. Ms. Julia Smith. She has been working here for almost 2 years and is very dedicated." Mary consulted a planner. "By the way, she has a little girl who sometimes accompanies her when she leaves school early. I hope you don't mind, sir. The girl is very polite and doesn't disturb the work." "A child," Richard murmured, the pieces starting to fall into place. It was a child who called the ambulance. It must have been Emma then. Miss Julia's little girl. Mary smiled. A very intelligent girl. "The other day I saw her observing the paintings in the waiting room and asking very mature questions for her age." Richard spent the rest of the morning trying to focus on the reports, but his mind kept drifting back to the episode. Someone had saved his life, and he didn't even know who it was. This feeling of debt bothered him deeply. In the afternoon, he made a decision that would change everything. He called the security company that provided services to the building. "Roberto, I need you to install additional cameras on my floor. I want coverage, total of the hallways and access to the recordings from the last 15 days. Any security issues, Mr. Miller? Just a precautionary measure." 2 weeks later, the cameras were installed, and Richard finally had access to the recordings from the night he fainted. Alone in his office, he watched the black and white footage that would reveal who had saved his life. The recording began at 6:30 p.m. He saw a dark-haired woman vacuuming the hallway, her movements efficient and careful. At 6:45 p.m., a small girl appeared in the frame, running down the hallway with a piece of paper in her hand, probably a drawing. The child entered his office for a few seconds and ran out, clearly frightened. Moments later, the woman rushed down the hallway and entered his office. The cameras did not cover the interior of the office, but he could tell from her body language that she had found something serious. The girl appeared again, talking on the phone, evidently calling for an ambulance. Richard watched the recording several times, studying every detail. The woman, Julia, looked young, perhaps in her 30s. She wore the blue uniform of the cleaning company, but there was something in her posture that caught his attention. She did not walk like someone defeated by life, but like someone who maintained dignity despite the circumstances. And the girl. There was something special about her. The way she observed the paintings, how she moved through the sophisticated environment without intimidation. At 6 years old, she had the presence of mind to act in an emergency. Why didn't they identify themselves? Richard murmured to himself. Anyone in a delicate financial situation would seize such an opportunity to ask for a reward, a favor, a promotion. But Julia simply disappeared, as if nothing had happened. In the following days, Richard began to observe discreetly. He discovered that Julia worked the afternoon shift, always arriving promptly at 3:30 p.m. and leaving around 7 p.m. Twice a week, her daughter accompanied her, sitting in a corner of the hallway to do homework or draw. One day, he saw her explaining to the girl the difference between Van Gogh and Picasso's techniques, pointing to reproductions in an art book borrowed from the library. Julia's dedication to educating her daughter deeply impressed him. She should be teaching, not cleaning offices, he thought, recalling his own privileged childhood, when he had private tutors for every subject. But what intrigued him most was Julia's demeanor. She performed her job with exemplary professionalism, but maintained a respectful distance from everyone. She never asked for favors, never made personal comments, never tried to draw attention. It was as if she were invisible, and that piqued his curiosity. "Mary, I need the complete file on employee Julia Smith. Professional history, references, everything." "Yes, sir. May I ask why?" "I'm considering some changes in the cleaning structure." The lie came naturally. Richard was not ready to admit that he had developed a fascination for the woman who saved his life without asking for anything in return. The file revealed information that surprised him. Julia had started college for education, but had dropped out in her 3rd semester. She had worked in various schools as an aide before landing the job in the building. All the references were excellent, highlighting her responsibility, punctuality, and discretion. There was no mention of Emma's father in the documents. Julia was a single mother, raising her daughter alone on a salary that barely covered basic needs. How does she manage to maintain her dignity amidst so many difficulties? Richard wondered, remembering his own tendency to be bitter when things didn't go as planned. That night, alone in his apartment in Manhattan, Richard looked out the panoramic window overlooking the sea. The luxury surrounding him, the Italian furniture, the original artworks, the climate-controlled wine cellar, suddenly felt empty and cold. Julia and Emma were at that moment in a simple apartment in Brooklyn, probably having a modest dinner, but together. They had something he had lost and could not regain, a genuine connection, a purpose that went beyond material success. "I need to give back somehow," he decided, but he knew he couldn't be direct. From the way Julia behaved, she would likely refuse any help that seemed like charity. He would have to be subtle, careful. And first, he needed to understand better who this woman was who had saved his life and disappeared into the shadows, carrying a secret she clearly did not intend to reveal. The month of April was just beginning, and Richard Miller had no idea he was about to embark on the most transformative journey of his life. May arrived with the autumn in full swing, bringing golden afternoons and a gentle breeze that relieved the heat of the last days of summer. On the 23rd floor of the corporate building, preparations for the annual company party had the entire team buzzing. Julia watched the activity with discreet attention as she polished the Carrara marble floor of the main hall. Employees came and went, carrying decorations, flowers, and sound equipment. It was always like this. She worked invisibly among the celebrations of others, an efficient shadow, ensuring everything was perfect for the company's important moments. "Mom, can I stay here drawing while you finish?" Emma was sitting in an armchair in the hall, her little legs swinging in the air. The school had let out early due to a pedagogical meeting, and Julia had no choice but to bring her. Of course, my love. But remember what we talked about. Don't disturb anyone and stay quiet. Julia smiled at her daughter, checking if she had all her drawing materials organized in the pink backpack that was already showing signs of wear. The main hall had been transformed for the party, round tables with white tablecloths, elegant floral arrangements, and a small stage where a jazz band was preparing to play. On the walls, paintings by American artists created a sophisticated atmosphere that impressed visitors and clients. Miss Julia, could you please take one last look at the restroom? The guests will start arriving in an hour. Mary approached with her usual efficiency, consulting an endless task list. Of course, Mary, I'll finish up here and head over. Julia gathered her cleaning supplies and made her way to the restroom. A luxurious space with framed mirrors and gold faucets. As she worked, she could hear the growing commotion in the hall, excited voices, laughter, the sound of the band doing final sound checks. When she returned to the foyer, she found a scene that made her stop abruptly. Emma was standing in front of a painting by Tarsila do Amaral, surrounded by 3 employees who were listening intently to her words. This painting is from Tarsila's anthropophagic phase. See how the colors are stronger. She wanted to show that Brazil could create its own art by mixing European influences with local elements. Emma's voice was clear and confident, as if she were giving a lecture. My God, how does a 6-year-old know so much about art? Asked Beatrice from marketing, impressed. My mum teaches me. She says art belongs to everyone, not just those who can afford to buy paintings. Emma smiled proudly, pointing out details of the artwork. Julia felt her face flush. On one hand, she was immensely proud of her daughter's intelligence. On the other, she feared that the situation could cause trouble. Employees shouldn't bring children to the workplace, let alone children who attracted attention like this. Emma, come here, sweetheart. Julia approached discreetly. I apologize for the disturbance. She sometimes gets very excited. Disturbance? On the contrary. Richard Miller appeared behind the group, his impeccable navy suit contrasting with his genuinely interested expression. It's rare to find someone so young, with such deep knowledge of Brazilian art. Julia felt her heart race. It was the first time she had been so close to her boss since the night she found him unconscious. He seemed completely recovered, but there was something different in his eyes, an attention, a curiosity that made her uncomfortable. Mr. Miller, I apologize. It won't happen again. She held Emma's hand, preparing to leave. You don't need to apologize. On the contrary, I'd like to know who the teacher was that taught her so much. Richard knelt down to Emma's level, smiling. How did you learn about Tarsila do Amaral? My mum takes me to the library every Saturday. We check out art books, and she explains the painters to me. Emma replied enthusiastically. She knows a lot about everything. She was even studying to be a teacher before I was born. Julia closed her eyes momentarily, feeling that she had lost control of the situation. Personal information shouldn't be shared in the workplace, especially with the owner of the company. How interesting. Richard stood up, looking directly at Julia. Education. Yes, but I didn't finish the course. Julia replied in a low voice, wishing the ground would open up and swallow her. Why not? The direct question caught her off guard. How could she explain to a man who had probably never faced hardship that she had to choose between her studies and her daughter's survival? Circumstances of life, sir. She responded diplomatically. Mom, tell him about that project you wrote on early. Childhood education. Emma tugged at her mom's shirt, excited. She has a notebook full of ideas on how to teach poor kids like me. Emma! Julia gently reprimanded, but the damage was already done. Richard watched the interaction between mother and daughter with growing interest. There was something about the way Julia carried herself, the dignity with which she faced the awkward situation, the politeness with which she spoke, the intelligence that shone in her eyes, that fascinated him. "Ladies and gentlemen, the party is about to begin," Mary announced, saving Julia from the uncomfortable moment. "Excuse me, Mr. Miller. I need to finish my work." Julia indicated she would step away, but he interrupted her. "Actually, I'd like to invite you both to stay at the party, as a thank you for the excellent work." "That's very kind, but it wouldn't be appropriate." Julia replied politely but firmly. "Why not?" Because it wouldn't." She couldn't articulate a more elaborate response without sounding rude. Richard noticed her discomfort and decided not to press further. "Well, if you change your mind, you'll be very welcome." Julia took Emma by the hand and headed to the locker room, where she kept her belongings. Her heart was still racing, and she tried to process what had just happened. Her boss had invited her to a social event. That had never happened in all her jobs. "Mum, why can't we stay at the party? There's music and delicious food." Emma pouted as she changed out of her school uniform into a pink blouse. "Because we weren't really invited, my love. He was just being polite," Julia explained patiently, fixing her daughter's hair. "But he seemed nice, and he liked talking about art." Julia sighed. How could she explain to a 6-year-old the complex social hierarchies that governed the adult world? How could she say that there were places where they simply didn't belong, no matter how kind or intelligent they were? "Emma, remember the story of Cinderella? Remember how she had to leave the ball before midnight?" "I remember. Sometimes real life is like that. We can look at the ball from afar. We might even receive a polite invitation, but we know our place." "But in the story, the prince went after her." "Oh, my love," Julia hugged her daughter, "princes only exist in fairy tales." As they waited for the elevator, Julia could hear the sounds of the party starting. Soft jazz, lively conversations, the clinking of crystal glasses. It was a world in which she participated only as a silent spectator, ensuring everything ran smoothly so that others could celebrate. The elevator arrived, and they descended in silence. Downstairs, real life awaited them. The crowded bus, the heavy traffic, the simple apartment where they would have instant noodles for dinner, while Emma did her homework at the kitchen table. What Julia didn't know was that up there, Richard Miller had spent the entire party thinking about the conversation he had with them, about how a woman who cleaned offices managed to educate a daughter with such knowledge and eloquence, about how she had politely declined his invitation, maintaining her dignity even in an uncomfortable situation, and mainly how a 6-year-old had shown more culture and intelligence than many of the executives present at the party. For the first time in 5 years, Richard Miller was genuinely intrigued by someone, and this discovery left him deeply uncomfortable. The June heat arrived with suffocating intensity in New York City. In the 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, Julia woke up to the familiar sound that terrified her, Emma's wheezing breath. The girl slept restlessly, her small chest rising and falling with difficulty, as if each breath was a struggle. "My love, how are you?" Julia approached the bed, gently touching her daughter's forehead. The skin was warm and damp with sweat. "Mom, it's hard to breathe," Emma whispered between short breaths, her brown eyes shining with tears of exhaustion. Julia felt the familiar tightness in her chest that accompanied her whenever Emma's asthma worsened. In the last 2 years, the attacks had become more frequent and intense. The last pulmonologist they consulted had been clear. Emma needed stronger medications and regular medical follow-ups, or the attacks could become fatal. "Come here, let's do the nebulization." Julia borrowed the nebulizer from a neighbor and prepared the medication that cost almost 1/3 of her monthly salary. "Breathe slowly, my princess. You'll feel better." While Emma underwent the nebulization, Julia mentally calculated the expenses. The rent, the basic bills, food, transportation, and now the increasingly expensive medications. Even cutting all unnecessary expenses, and there hadn't been anything superfluous in their lives for a long time, the money was not enough. "Mum, am I not going to school today?" Emma asked after the nebulization, still panting. "No, my love. Today you need to rest." Julia stroked her daughter's hair. "And tomorrow we'll go to the clinic to talk to the doctor." 2 hours later, Julia arrived at work with red eyes from worry. She had left Emma with Miss Johnson, the retired neighbor who sometimes took care of the girl when necessary. The 70-year-old woman was kind, but Julia felt guilty for not being able to afford proper care. "Good morning, Miss Julia. Is everything okay? You look a bit down." Mary immediately noticed Julia's state as she passed by the reception. "Good morning, Miss Mary. I'm fine, really." Julia forced a smile, quickly heading to the locker room. She had learned long ago not to mix personal problems with work. But focusing on her tasks was proving impossible. As she cleaned the tables in the finance department, her mind wouldn't stop calculating how much would a private health insurance plan cost, how much were the tests Emma needed to undergo. How would she manage to pay for a specialist pulmonologist? "Excuse me, may I get through? I need to grab some documents." The deep voice brought her back to reality. Richard Miller was standing at the door of the department, watching her closely. "Of course, Mr. Miller, excuse me." Julia quickly stepped aside, but not before he noticed the worried expression on her face. "Is everything all right?" The direct question caught her off guard. Julia looked at him, trying to decipher whether it was just politeness or genuine concern. In the last 2 months, since the company party, she had noticed that he was observing her more, asking small questions about her work, leaving occasional thank you notes. Nothing inappropriate, but an attention that made her uncomfortable. "Yes, sir, I'm perfectly fine." Richard didn't seem convinced, but he didn't press further. "Mary mentioned that your daughter didn't come today. Is she sick?" Julia hesitated. On one hand, she wanted to keep her personal life completely separate from work. On the other, her worry for Emma was consuming all her energy. "It's just a cold, sir. Nothing serious." "I understand." Richard took the documents he needed and mentioned leaving, but paused at the door. "Julia, the company offers health insurance for all employees. Did you know that?" "Yes, sir, but it only covers full-time employees with more than 2 years at the company." "And how long have you been here?" 1 year and 10 months, sir." Richard was thoughtful for a few seconds. "I'll check with HR to see if there's a way to expedite that benefit in special cases." "Mr. Miller, that's not necessary. I didn't ask," Julia began, but he had already left. 3 days later, Mary called Julia to her desk. "Miss Julia, I have good news. Mr. Miller authorized a special extension of the company health plan for you and your daughter in recognition of your excellent work." Julia was stunned. "What do you mean?" "It's simple. Starting today, you have full coverage. Pediatrics, emergencies, tests, medications, everything covered." Mary smiled, proud to deliver the good news. "But I can't accept this." "Why not?" Because it's not fair to the other employees, and I didn't ask for any favors." Mary looked at her with maternal understanding. "Miss Julia, sometimes we need to accept help. It's not charity. It's a benefit the company is offering based on merit. And your little girl needs medical care, doesn't she?" Julia felt her eyes fill with tears, the struggle between pride and the desperate need to care. For Emma was waging a fierce battle in her chest. "I need to think." "There's nothing to think about. The cards are already ready." Mary extended 2 health insurance cards. "And one more thing. Mr. Miller asked me to recommend an excellent pediatric pulmonologist who is covered by the network. That night, Julia arrived home with the health insurance cards in her bag and a divided heart. She found Emma still coughing, weakly playing with her dolls on the sofa in the living room. "Mum, are you crying?" Emma immediately noticed her mother's emotional state. "No, my love, it's just that something very good happened today." Julia sat down next to her daughter, showing her the cards. "Now we can take proper care of your breathing." "What do you mean?" "Heaven sent an angel to help us." It was the only way Julia could find to explain without getting into complicated details about pride, dignity, and accepting favors. A real angel? A real one. The next morning, Julia scheduled an appointment with the pulmonologist recommended by Mary. Dr. Edward Foster was a middle-aged man with an excellent reputation and an office in Manhattan, the kind of doctor she never imagined she could afford for Emma. Emma's asthma is moderate to severe, but perfectly manageable with the right treatment, Dr. Foster explained after a detailed consultation. "We'll adjust the medication and do monthly follow-ups. With the right care, she can lead a completely normal life." "Doctor, how much will all this treatment cost?" Julia asked, still not accustomed to the idea that she didn't have to count every penny. "Don't worry. Your plan covers everything. Medications, consultations, tests. Your daughter will receive the best available treatment." On the bus ride home, Emma slept in Julia's lap, breathing peacefully for the first time in weeks. Julia looked out the window, watching the city go by, and fought against a storm of emotions. Gratitude, a deep and overwhelming gratitude for finally seeing her daughter receive the care she deserved. Relief. The relief of no longer having to choose between medicine and food, between medical appointments and paying basic bills. But also fear. Fear of creating a dangerous dependency. Fear that this help might come at a price she couldn't yet see. And more than anything, a question that wouldn't leave her mind. Why was Richard Miller doing this for them? That night, after putting Emma to sleep, breathing peacefully thanks to the new medications, Julia sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter. "Mr. Miller, I have no words to express my gratitude for what you have done for my daughter and me. I know I don't deserve such a gesture of kindness, and I promise to work even more diligently to live up to the trust placed in me. Respectfully, Julia Smith." The next day, she left the letter on his desk. She didn't expect a reply. She just wanted him to know that the gesture hadn't gone unnoticed. But when she arrived at work the following day, she found a note on her desk. "Julia, every child deserves access to the best health care. It's not kindness, it's justice. Keep being the excellent mother and professional that you are. R. Miller." It was at that moment that Julia realized something had changed irreversibly between them. This was no longer just a job, and he was no longer just a distant boss. And that scared her more than any asthma attack Emma could have. July arrived with an unexpected chill for New York City. The mornings dawned grey, with a fine drizzle perfectly mirroring the tense atmosphere hanging over the 23rd floor of the corporate building. For 3 consecutive weeks, external auditors occupied meeting rooms, scrutinizing every document, every transaction, every contract of Richard Miller's company. "Mr. Miller, we need to review the supply contracts from the last 2 years again." Dr. Alan Parker, the chief auditor, was sitting in the meeting room with a grave expression that boded nothing good. "We've found some irregularities that require urgent clarification." Richard had felt a constant pressure in his chest for days. The empire he had meticulously built over 15 years was being questioned, dissected, put under suspicion. Worse still, the irregularities seemed to point to someone very close to him. "What kind of irregularities?" Richard asked, although part of him already knew the answer. Overpriced contracts, payments to shell companies, diversions totaling approximately $8 million over the last 3 years. Dr. Parker pushed a thick folder across the table. All authorized by someone with privileged access to the financial system. The revelation hit Richard like a punch to the stomach. 8 million. Almost a third of the company's profits in recent years had been diverted right under his nose, and he, who prided himself on controlling every aspect of the business, had noticed nothing. Who had that level of access? He asked, although he already suspected the answer. Besides you, only 3 people. Your partner Edward Braga, the financial director Sarah Collins, and the accounts manager Frank Lewis. Edward, his partner for 12 years, best man at his wedding, the person he trusted most in the world after Helena's death. The person who had comforted him in the toughest moments, who had helped expand the company when it was just a startup with 2 employees. I need more evidence before making any accusations, Richard said, but his voice sounded hollow. In the following weeks, the pressure at work began to physically affect Richard. He arrived at the office before 7 in the morning and left after midnight, trying to trace every suspicious transaction, review every contract, understand how he had been so blindly trusting. Julia noticed the change immediately. The man who always seemed to have absolute control over everything now looked exhausted, with deep dark circles under his eyes and a constant tension in his shoulders. She saw him talking tensely on the phone, pacing back and forth in his office, leaving untouched food on his desk. "Miss Julia, hasn't Mr. Miller gone out for lunch again today?" Mary asked with concern. "That's the 4th time this week." "I don't know, Mary. He seems very worried about something," Julia replied, discreetly cleaning his desk. There were papers scattered everywhere, coffee cups. On a cold afternoon, in the center of the room, there was a bottle of medication for high blood pressure that hadn't been there the week before. That day, while organizing the documents that Richard had left scattered, Julia made a decision that would change everything. Instead of just cleaning around the papers, she prepared a healthy sandwich in the break room and left it on his desk, along with a simple note: "Don't forget to eat." When Richard returned from a meeting 2 hours later, he found the sandwich and stared at it for several seconds. How long had it been since someone cared about his well-being without any ulterior motives? How long had it been since someone had shown genuine care for him? He ate the sandwich slowly, savoring not just the food, but the almost forgotten feeling of being cared for by someone. The next day, Julia found a note on her desk. "Thank you. That was the best sandwich I've had in years." From that point on, a silent routine was established. Every day, Julia left a healthy snack on Richard's desk: fruits, sandwiches, juices. She never said anything, never expected thanks. It was just a gesture of humanity amidst corporate coldness, and every day Richard left a thank you note in response. "You know you don't have to do this, right?" he asked one Thursday afternoon when he found her organizing her desk. Julia paused what she was doing, surprised that he had brought up the subject directly. "You're going through a tough time. It's just human solidarity." "How do you know I'm going through a tough time?" Because you can tell when someone is carrying a heavy burden alone," Julia replied softly. "And because you forget to eat when you're worried, just like my daughter when she's nervous about something at school." The comparison made him smile for the first time in weeks. "Your daughter gets nervous at school?" "Sometimes. When she has a presentation or a test, she gets so worried about doing everything perfectly that she forgets to take care of herself." "And what do you do in those cases?" "I remind her that doing her best is already enough, that no one can control everything, just do their part with dedication." Julia finished organizing the papers and prepared to leave, but stopped at the door. "And I also remind her that she's not alone, that there's always someone cheering for her." After she left, Richard thought about those words for a long time. When was the last time someone had told him he wasn't alone? The following week, the bomb finally exploded. The evidence against Edward was irrefutable. Transfers to personal accounts, forged contracts, a complex network of shell companies created to mask the embezzlement. Worse still, the scheme had been running for 4 years, right after the deaths of Helena and Gabriel, when Richard was most vulnerable and least attentive to financial details. "You betrayed my trust, Edward. You betrayed our friendship." Richard was in his private office, face to face with the man he had considered a brother. "Richard, I can explain." Edward tried, but the words sounded empty. "Explain what? How you took advantage of my grief to steal the company we built together? How you looked me in the eye every day knowing you were betraying me? The company was doing well, profits were high. I just took a small part." "8 million is a small part," Richard exploded. "Edward, I entrusted my life to you. When Helena died, you were the only person I had left, and you stole from me." The pain in Richard's voice was palpable. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the betrayal of someone he loved, like family. That night, Richard stayed alone in the office until very late, contemplating the wreckage of yet another important relationship. In his life, first Helena and Gabriel, taken by an accident, now Edward, lost to greed and betrayal. "Maybe I'm destined to be alone," he thought bitterly. It was then that he saw the note Julia had left with the afternoon snack. "Tough days don't last forever. Strong people do." Richard held the note for long minutes, feeling something he hadn't experienced in years, the sensation that someone genuinely cared about his well-being, expecting nothing in return. And for the first time since the audit began, he felt that maybe he wasn't completely alone after all. On the other side of the city in Brooklyn, Julia was putting Emma to bed, happily noticing that the girl's breathing was becoming more peaceful thanks to the proper treatment. "Mom, why do you always make snacks for the book, Uncle?" Emma asked curiously. "Because sometimes people need to be reminded that someone cares about them, my daughter. Just like when you take care of me when I'm sick." "Exactly. So, do you like the book, Uncle?" Julia hesitated, surprised by her daughter's insight. I think he's a good person going through a tough time." "Just like us when you lost your job last year?" "Exactly." Emma nodded, satisfied with the answer, and closed her eyes, but Julia stayed awake for a long time, thinking about her daughter's words. Could it be true? Was she really starting to care about Richard Miller beyond a professional relationship? And if it were true, what would that mean for the carefully constructed life she had built for herself and Emma? The month of August brought a discovery that would forever change the dynamic between Julia and Richard. It was a Wednesday morning when he arrived early at the office at 7 o'clock and found something that deeply touched him. On his desk, besides the usual morning snack, there was a small piece of paper with a handwritten chart in neat handwriting. Julia had carefully noted the times for all his medications. 8 a.m., captopril 25 mg. 1 p.m., metformin 500 milliliters. 8 p.m., insulin. Check blood sugar first. And next to it, a list of foods he should avoid. Refined sugar, fried foods, excessive caffeine, alcoholic beverages on an empty stomach. Richard stared at that paper for several minutes, a strange sensation taking hold of his chest. Helena used to do this in the early years of their marriage, when he was just a young businessman working too hard and taking care of himself too little. After her death, no one had shown that kind of concern for his health. How does she know about my medications, he wondered, but soon remembered the many times he had left the pills on the table, the medical appointments that Mary would call out loudly, the moments he had checked his blood sugar in his own office. Julia watched everything, silently, carefully. That afternoon, When she arrived for the afternoon shift, Richard was waiting for her. "Julia, can we talk?" She stopped at the office door, visibly nervous. "Yes, Mr. Miller. Did I do something wrong?" "On the contrary." He held up the paper with the notes. "I want to know why you did this." Julia felt her face heat up. I apologize if I overstepped. It's just that I noticed that you sometimes forget your medications when you're very busy." "How do you know which medications I take?" "I didn't mean to snoop, sir. But when I'm cleaning your desk, I sometimes see the bottles and—" She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "My grandfather was diabetic and hypertensive. I took care of him in his last years. I know how important it is to keep up with medication routines." Richard stepped a little closer, studying her expression. "Did your grandfather pass away?" "Yes, sir. 3 years ago. He raised me after my mother passed away. He was a good man, hard-working, a retired construction worker." Julia spoke with affection and nostalgia. "He always said that rich and poor have the same blood, the same need for care. And you applied that to me. You are a human being just like anyone else. Rich or poor, everyone deserves someone who cares about their health." The simplicity and sincerity of her response touched Richard deeply. He had spent years surrounded by people who approached him out of interest, who pretended to care to gain favors. And here was a woman who genuinely cared for him, expecting nothing in return. "Julia, can I ask you a personal question?" She nodded, though clearly uncomfortable. "Why didn't you finish your degree in education? Mary told me you were in your 3rd semester." Julia's face immediately closed off. It was a wound that still hurt even after so many years. "Circumstances of life, sir." "What kind of circumstances?" Julia fell silent for a few seconds, struggling internally. Part of her wanted to maintain her privacy, but there was something in the way Richard asked, not as a curious boss, but as someone genuinely interested, that made her lower her guard. "I got pregnant in my 3rd semester. The father of the child disappeared when he found out about the pregnancy. I didn't have the money to pay for college and raise a child alone." Her voice was low but firm. "So I made the choice any mother would make. I prioritized my daughter." "And you never thought about going back to school?" "Every day." The answer came out quicker and more emotional than she intended. "But between working to support Emma and going back to school, well, bills don't wait for dreams." Richard pondered. "What kind of work would you like to do if money weren't an issue?" "Early childhood education, especially with children from working families." Julia answered without hesitation. "I believe every child has potential, regardless of where they were born. They just need the right opportunity and encouragement. Like you do with Emma." "Exactly. She is not to blame for being born poor. That doesn't mean she should have less access to knowledge." Richard observed the passion shining in Julia's eyes when she spoke about education. It was the same determination he recognized in himself when he talked about business. "Julia, have you ever thought that maybe your opportunity is closer than you think?" "What do you mean?" But before he could respond, Mary interrupted over the intercom. "Mr. Miller, the lawyer has arrived for the meeting about the Edward case." "I have to go," Richard said, frustrating Julia, who was curious about what he meant. That night, Richard stayed in the office very late, but he wasn't working. He was researching scholarship programs, colleges with evening courses in education, corporate daycare centers, educational social projects. An idea was starting to form in his mind, an idea that could change Julia and Emma's lives, but also give new purpose to his own existence. In the apartment in Brooklyn, Julia was helping Emma with her math homework at the kitchen table. "Mom, why did you stop studying to be a teacher?" Emma asked out of the blue while solving addition problems. "Because you were born, my love, and I needed to work to take care of you." "Do you regret it?" Regret having you? Never. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. But do you regret not being a teacher? Julia stopped helping with the homework and looked at her daughter. How could a 6-year-old ask such insightful questions? Sometimes I think about what it would be like, but it's not regret. It's more like a longing for a dream. Dreams can't come true after we grow up. Some can. Others we keep in our hearts as a beautiful memory. Emma was thoughtful for a few seconds. Mom, the book Uncle asked about you today. Julia looked up, surprised. What do you mean? When I was drawing in the hallway, he passed by and asked if you were okay, if you needed anything. He said you seemed like a very intelligent person. He said that. He did. And he also said he thinks every intelligent person deserves a chance to use their intelligence. Julia fell silent, processing the information. What was Richard thinking? Why was he asking these questions, showing this interest in her life? And more importantly, why did this leave her feeling both hopeful and terrified at the same time? That night, after putting Emma to sleep, Julia sat alone on the balcony of the apartment, watching the city lights. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to dream. What if it was really possible to go back to school? What if she could become the teacher she always wanted to be? But along with hope came fear. Fear of being disappointed again. Fear of creating expectations that could be shattered. And most importantly, fear of getting too close to a man who lived in a completely different world than hers. It can't work, she murmured to the night. People like me don't have happy endings with people like him. But her heart, for the first time in a long while, whispered a different possibility. The beginning of September brought an urgency that neither of them was prepared to face. It was a Monday morning when Julia received the call that would change everything. Mom, I can't breathe properly. Emma's voice on the phone was weak, punctuated by labored breaths. She was at school when the asthma attack began, more intense than any previous one. Calm down, my love. Did the school nurse call an ambulance? I'm on my way. Julia rushed out of the building, her hands trembling as she tried to hail a cab in Manhattan. At Mount Sinai Hospital, Dr. Edward Foster had a grave expression that froze Julia's blood. Julia, Emma's asthma is no longer responding to the medications we've been using. She needs surgery to correct the bronchial obstruction. It's a delicate procedure, but necessary. Surgery? Julia felt the ground open beneath her feet. Doctor, is it dangerous? Every surgical procedure has risks, but without it, the attacks will become more frequent and severe. We can schedule it for next week. How much will it cost? The health insurance covers the procedure, but there are some additional costs. Special post-surgery medications, respiratory therapy, intensive follow-up, about $15,000 that aren't covered under the standard plan. Julia felt the world spin. Even with health insurance, there were costs she could never cover. $15,000 was almost 2 years of her salary. Doctor, can I think about it? Talk to my family? Dr. Foster looked at her with understanding. Of course. But Julia, don't take too long. With each attack, the situation can worsen. That afternoon, Julia returned to work with a broken heart. How would she tell Emma that she might not be able to afford the treatment she needed? How would she look into her daughter's eyes, knowing that money, always the damned money, could prevent her from having a normal life? Miss Julia, are you okay? You look upset. Mary immediately noticed her state. My daughter, she needs surgery. Julia could barely form the words. Oh my God, is it serious? It's necessary, but there are some costs that... Julia couldn't finish the sentence. How could she explain that $15,000 was an impossible fortune for her? 2 hours later, Julia was cleaning Richard's office when he returned from a meeting. He immediately sensed that something was wrong. "Julia, did something happen?" She stopped cleaning and faced him. Her eyes were red, and there was a deep sadness in her expression that he had never seen before. "My daughter needs surgery, sir." "Is it serious?" It's necessary for her to breathe normally." Julia tried to maintain her composure, but her voice trembled. "Does the health insurance not cover it?" "It covers the procedure, but there are extra costs that—" She stopped, clearly embarrassed. "Sir, I shouldn't be talking about this. I apologize." Richard watched her for a few seconds. In recent months he had learned to read Julia's expressions, to sense when she was worried, when she was trying to hide a problem. And now, seeing that strong and dignified woman clearly desperate, he made a decision he hadn't expected. "How much?" "Sir? How much do those extra procedures cost?" "Mr. Miller, I can't—" "Julia, your daughter saved my life. She was the first to find me when I collapsed. If it weren't for her, I could have died alone in that office." Richard spoke with conviction. "It's my turn to give back." "You don't understand. It's not just about the money. It's $15,000. To you it may seem little, but to me—" The tears finally fell. "To you it's a fortune. I understand." Richard stepped closer but maintained a respectful distance. "And that's exactly why I want to help." "I can't accept it. I've already accepted the health plan. That's already more than I deserve." "Julia, look at me." He waited until she raised her eyes. "This isn't charity, it's gratitude. Your daughter saved my life, and now it's my turn to save hers. And if I can never pay you back, who said you need to pay me back?" The question caught her off guard. "Everything in life has a price, Mr. Miller." "Not everything. Some things we do just because it's the right thing to do." Julia remained silent for several seconds, battling between fierce pride and desperate love for her daughter. If I accept, will you promise that this won't change anything between us? That I will continue to be treated as an employee, not as someone who owes favors?" "I promise." "And you promise that if I ever can, I will be able to pay back every cent?" Richard hesitated. He knew she would probably never be able to repay such an amount, but he also knew she needed to believe in that possibility to maintain her dignity. "I promise." Julia closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and made the hardest decision of her life. "I accept. For Emma." 3 days later, Emma was in the operating room at Mount Sinai Hospital, and Julia waited in the hallway with trembling hands. 2 hours felt like an eternity until Dr. Richard appeared with a smile. Everything went perfectly. Emma is a warrior. In a few weeks, she will be breathing like any normal child. Julia broke down in tears of relief. Her daughter would be okay. Her smart, brave, and lively girl would have a chance to grow up healthy. That night, while Emma slept sedated in the hospital room, Julia received an unexpected message. "How is she? R." She typed and deleted several responses before sending, "Fine, thank you," once again. The reply came quickly. "No need to thank me. I wish her a great recovery." It was then that Julia realized something that scared her. She was no longer thinking of Richard merely as the boss who had helped her. She was starting to see him as the man who genuinely cared about her daughter's well-being, and this discovery changed everything. 2 weeks later, Emma was home, breathing better than she had in years. Every afternoon when Julia returned from work, she found small gifts at the door: educational children's books, building games that stimulated reasoning, puzzles featuring American art. There were never any notes identifying the sender, but Julia knew who it was. "Mom, who sends these gifts?" Emma asked, flipping through a book about dinosaurs. A guardian angel, my love. The same angel who paid for my surgery. The same. Emma looked thoughtful. Mum, I think this angel really likes us. Julia looked at her daughter, seeing the innocence with which she viewed the situation. To Emma, it was simple. Someone good was taking care of them. For Julia, it was much more complicated, because she was starting to suspect that the feelings involved in this story went far beyond gratitude and paternal care, and that terrified and excited her in equal measure. The month of October brought a twist that would shake the foundations of the carefully built relationship between Julia and Richard. It was a Thursday afternoon when Frank Lewis, the account manager who had worked side by side with Edward Foster for years, requested an urgent meeting with Richard. "Mr. Miller, I need to tell you something I should have said a long time ago." Frank was visibly nervous, his hands trembling as he held a folder full of documents. "It's about the night you collapsed," Richard frowned. "What does Edward have to do with this?" "It's not about Edward, sir. It's about who really saved your life." Frank opened the folder and showed a document. "I was working late that day, organizing files in the basement. When I went upstairs to grab my wallet that I had forgotten, I heard a commotion on your floor." "Go on." "I went up and saw the cleaning staff, Miss Julia, running out of the elevator. She was frantic, carrying her little girl. I heard her shouting for the girl to call for the ambulance while checking if you were breathing." Frank paused, clearly uncomfortable. "Sir, it was Miss Julia who saved your life. She performed the first aid procedures and instructed her daughter to call the ambulance." Richard felt the world stop. "What do you mean? Why didn't you say this before?" Because when the paramedics arrived, Miss Julia had disappeared. And later, when they asked who had made the call, she asked me not to say anything. She said she didn't want to cause trouble, that she was worried about losing her job for bringing her daughter to the office after hours. She asked you to lie. Not lie, sir, just not complicate her situation. Miss Julia is a very private person. She never asks anything from anyone. I thought she had her reasons." Richard leaned back in his chair, processing the information. All these months, he had been trying to find out who had saved him, and the answer had been right under his nose. Julia had not only saved him physically, she had become the person who cared for him daily, silently, without expecting recognition. "Frank, why are you telling me this now?" "Because I saw how you've been treating Miss Julia lately. The medical care for her daughter, the special attention. I realized you suspected something, and I thought you deserved to know the whole truth." After Frank left, Richard was alone in his office for over an hour, rethinking every interaction he had had with Julia. All her humility, all her resistance to accepting help, all the silent care she showed, it all made sense now. She had saved his life and kept it a secret for over 7 months. In that moment, Richard understood something that hit him like a lightning bolt. He was not just grateful to Julia, he was in love with her. The realization terrified him deeply. For 5 years, since Helena's death, he had built walls against any romantic feelings. He had convinced himself that he would never love anyone again, that he would never allow himself to be vulnerable in that way. But Julia had broken down all his defenses without even trying. The next morning, he was waiting when she arrived for work. "Julia, I need to talk to you." "Yes, Mr. Miller." She looked visibly anxious. "Did I do something wrong?" "On the contrary, I want to know why you never told me that it was you who saved me." Julia paled. "How did you know?" "That doesn't matter. What matters is why you hid this from me." Julia was silent for a few seconds, clearly struggling internally. Finally, she sighed and told the truth. "Because I was scared, sir." "Scared of what?" "Scared of losing my job. Emma shouldn't have been here that night. I broke company rules. And then, after I saw how you reacted, How you started treating us with special care. I was afraid you would discover the truth and think I was using the situation to gain advantages. And were you? Never! The response came quickly and full of indignation. Mr. Miller, I would never, ever use a situation like that to benefit myself. What I did was instinct, humanity. Anyone would have done the same. That's not true. Many people would have pretended they saw nothing or taken advantage of the situation afterward. Then those people weren't raised the way I was, Richard said, moving closer and studying her face. How were you raised, Julia? To work honestly, to help when possible, and to expect nothing in return. She lifted her chin with dignity. My grandfather always said, do good and forget it. If you wait for recognition, you didn't do good. You made a deal. The simplicity and nobility of her response touched Richard deeply. He had spent years surrounded by people who did everything expecting something in return, who calculated every gesture, every favor. And here was a woman who had saved his life and hidden for months to avoid looking self-serving. Julia, can I ask you a personal question? Go ahead. Do you feel anything for me? The question caught her completely off guard. For a few seconds she struggled to catch her breath. Mr. Miller, be honest, please. Julia closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and made one of the bravest decisions of her life. She decided to be completely honest. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I do. But I also know it can't work. Why not? Because we live in different worlds. Because I am your employee. Because I have a small daughter and a complicated life. Because you are a widower and still carry the pain of loss. Because... Her voice faltered. Because people like me don't have happy endings with people like you. Richard moved even closer until he was right next to her. And what if I told you that you're wrong? What if I said, I've spent the last few months discovering that you are the most extraordinary person I've ever met? I would say you're confusing gratitude with something else. And what if I said it's not gratitude, that it's something much bigger and scarier than that? Julia looked at him, seeing in his eyes a sincerity and vulnerability she had never seen before. I would say that terrifies me, Mr. Miller. Why does it terrify you? Because I'm feeling something much bigger and scarier than I should. The confession came out, softly, almost a whisper. And that could destroy everything I've built for myself and my daughter. Richard reached out, gently touching her face. What if I promised I wouldn't let that destroy anything? That I would protect you and Emma always? Mr. Miller. Richard. My name is Richard. Richard, she repeated, testing the name on her lips. This is very complicated. The best things in life are always complicated. In that moment, in the silence of the office, they were closer than they had ever been, but there was still an abyss between them, an abyss made of social differences, fears, responsibilities, and scars from the past. What neither of them knew was that October was just beginning, and the events to come would test all the feelings they had just confessed to each other. The month of November brought a subtle yet profound change to the routine of the 13th floor. After their mutual confession of feelings at the end of October, Julia and Richard were trying to navigate the new emotional territories carefully, maintaining professional appearances while something much greater blossomed between them. "Mum, can I stay a little longer at the office today?" Emma asked one Tuesday afternoon, swinging her legs on the bus seat. Her recovery from surgery had been exemplary, and she was more excited than ever. "I want to show my new drawing to the book uncle." "Book uncle?" Julia smiled at how her daughter referred to Richard. "Why do you call him that?" "Because he has a huge library in his office, and the other day he showed me a book about Leonardo da Vinci that was beautiful." Emma's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. "Mom, Did you know that Leonardo da Vinci invented flying machines and that he wrote backward? Julia was surprised. When did he show you that? Last week, when you were cleaning the bathroom, he saw I was looking at the paintings in his office and asked if I knew other artists. Then he took the book and told me a bunch of stories. A strange feeling took over Julia's chest. On one hand, she was happy that Richard was showing genuine interest in Emma. On the other, she worried about her daughter getting attached to someone who could disappear from their lives. When they arrived at the office that afternoon, Julia found a scene that made her stop at Richard's office door. Emma was sitting in an armchair next to his desk, both of them leaning over a book on Renaissance art. Richard was patiently explaining painting techniques, while Emma asked intelligent questions and made surprising observations for a 6-year-old. "Uncle Richard, why do people in old paintings always look sad?" Emma asked, pointing to a reproduction of the Mona Lisa. "Good question. Do you think she looks sad?" "A little, but it also seems like she knows a secret." Richard smiled, impressed with the girl's insight. "Did you know that many adults spend years studying this painting and can't make an observation as intelligent as yours?" "Really? Really? You have a special talent for seeing details that others don't notice." Julia watched the interaction with a divided heart. There was something deeply touching about how Richard treated Emma, not as an annoying child, but as an intelligent person who deserved attention and encouragement. It was the father figure Emma had never had. "Sorry to interrupt," Julia announced softly. "Mum, Uncle Richard is showing me the most famous paintings in the world." Emma ran to hug her mother, beaming with happiness. "That's great, my love, but now I need to work, and you can't interrupt." "Actually," Richard interjected, "if you don't mind, I would like to show her a few more books. Only if you allow it, of course." Julia hesitated. Accepting meant crossing even further the line between professional and personal life, but seeing the expectation in her daughter's eyes, she nodded. "Just don't let it interfere with your work with Uncle Richard." "I promise," Emma shouted, running back to the armchair. While Julia cleaned the other offices, she could hear lively conversations coming from Richard's room. He was teaching Emma about different periods of art, about Brazilian history, about science, and she absorbed everything like a sponge, asking questions that showed an impressive thirst for knowledge. "She's brilliant," Richard said when Julia returned an hour later. "That girl's IQ must be exceptionally high." "She's always been curious," Julia replied with maternal pride. "Since she was little, she wanted to know how everything works." "Julia, can I make a suggestion?" "Sure. Emma should be in a school that properly stimulates her intelligence. A private school with a program for gifted children." Julia felt the familiar tightness in her chest that always came whenever financial reality was mentioned. "That's not possible right now." "What if it were?" "What do you mean?" Richard hesitated, clearly thinking about how to approach the subject without hurting her pride. "What if there was a scholarship available?" "Richard," Julia used his first name for the first time outside intimate moments, "I can't accept more favors. I've already accepted too much." "It wouldn't be a favor. It would be an investment." "In what?" "In the future. In Emma's future. In your future. In our future." The last phrase hung in the air between them. It was the first time Richard openly spoke about our future. "Richard, we haven't talked about this yet." "Then let's talk." He stepped closer, but kept a respectful distance. "Julia, in the last few months you've become the most important person in my life, you and Emma. I know it's complicated, I know there are obstacles, but I'm in love with you, completely, hopelessly in love." Julia felt her heart race. "Richard, and it's not just about you. I love Emma as if she were my daughter. When she smiles, when she asks an intelligent question, when she calls me Uncle Richard, I feel something I haven't felt In 5 years. What do you feel? That I have a family again. The words hit Julia like a lightning bolt. She had spent 6 years raising Emma alone, being both father and mother, struggling to give her daughter everything she needed. And now there was a man who not only loved her daughter, but wanted to be part of the family they represented. "I'm in love with you too," she confessed softly. "But I'm very scared." "Of what?" "That this is a dream that will end. That you'll get tired of our simple life. That Emma will get too attached and then suffer when you leave." "Who said I'm leaving? Because it's always been like this in my life. Good people never stay." Richard stepped closer, gently touching her face. "What if I promised that I would stay? That I would be here for you and for Emma, no matter what happens? How can I be sure?" "Because," he paused, looking deeply into her eyes, "because you two are the best thing that has happened to me in 5 years. You made me remember what it is to love, what it is to have a purpose beyond work." In that moment, with Emma softly humming while drawing in the armchair beside them, Julia made a decision that would change their lives forever. "Okay. Okay, what?" "Okay, let's try. Let's see where this takes us." Richard smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his entire face. "Really? Really? But with one condition." "What?" "Let's take it slow. Emma first always. And if at any point you realize this isn't what you want, tell me honestly. I don't want her to get hurt. I promise, and I promise to try to trust." At that moment, when they kissed for the first time in the silent office, with Emma drawing peacefully beside them, neither of them imagined that December would bring events that would test all the promises they had just made. But for now, in the golden warmth of November, they had found something rare and precious, a second chance to love, to be family, to build a future together. December arrived with a revelation that would change everything. It was a Thursday morning when Mark, the building's security supervisor, approached Richard with the recordings that would finally clarify all the mysteries. "Mr. Miller, I managed to recover the footage from the internal system on the night you collapsed. The hallway cameras captured everything." Mark inserted the USB drive into the computer. "You need to see this." The footage clearly showed Julia running down the hallway after finding him unconscious, Emma calling for emergency services with trembling but determined hands, and then something that deeply moved Richard. Julia had stayed by his side for the 15 minutes it took for the ambulance to arrive, constantly checking his breathing, whispering words of encouragement, organizing the medications to show the paramedics. "Why didn't she want us to know about this?" Mark asked, observing the emotion on Richard's face. "Because she's the most genuine person I've ever met," Richard replied, his voice choked. That afternoon, when Julia arrived for work, Richard was waiting for her, with a different expression on his face. "Julia, I saw the recordings." She paled. "What recordings?" "The ones from the day I collapsed. I saw everything. How you took care of me. How Emma was brave. How you both saved my life, and then disappeared as if nothing had happened. Richard, I already explained why." "It's not about that." He stepped closer, taking her hands. "It's about what I saw in the footage. Julia, you took care of me as if I were important to you. This was in March, long before anything happened between us." Julia lowered her eyes, embarrassed. "Anyone would have done the same." "No. You were whispering for me to be okay, saying everything would be all right, organizing my medications to make it easier for the paramedics. Did you care about me back then, didn't you?" The direct question left her speechless. After so many months of keeping secrets, she decided to be completely honest. "Yes," she whispered, "from the first day I started working here, I admired your dedication, your intelligence, and when I saw you collapsed, alone in that huge office, my heart broke." "Why?" Because I realized that behind all this success was a lonely man who had no one to take care of him, and that reminded me of my grandfather in the last years of his life. Richard pulled her into an embrace, feeling as if all the pieces of a complex puzzle finally fell into place. "Julia, I want to make you a proposal." "What kind of proposal?" "A job proposal. I want you to coordinate a new project I'm developing." She pulled away, confused. "What project?" "An educational foundation for children from working families, like Emma. I want to offer quality education, tutoring, encouragement for gifted children." He paused, studying her reaction. "And I want you to be the educational coordinator." Julia was speechless. "I don't have the qualifications for that." "You will. I'll pay for you to finish your degree in education, get a specialization, all the courses you need. Julia, you have something that can't be learned in school, a genuine passion for education and the ability to see potential where others don't. Richard, this is my dream, to create something that has real meaning, that truly changes lives, and I want to do it with you, by my side." Tears streamed down Julia's face. It was more than she had dared to dream. It wasn't just a job. It was the realization of a dream she had buried 7 years ago. January 2025 brought seismic changes. Julia started her evening classes in education, while during the day she worked on planning the foundation. Emma was enrolled at St. Monica Academy, a private school of excellence where her intellectual abilities could be adequately stimulated, but February would test them all in unexpected ways. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Julia simply fell apart. Months of tension, changes, adapting to a new reality, and the pressure of balancing school, work, and motherhood finally took their toll. She fainted in the college library, physically and emotionally exhausted. "Mom! Mom! Wake up!" Emma's desperate voice brought her back to consciousness. She was on the library floor, surrounded by concerned people and her daughter, who was crying in fear. "It's okay, my love. Mommy is fine." Julia tried to sit up, but the dizziness was intense. "Mom, I called Uncle Richard. He's coming to get us." 20 minutes later, Richard arrived at the library like a whirlwind, his face marked by genuine concern. "How are you?" He knelt beside her, checking her temperature, her pulse, just as she had done for him months earlier. "Just tired. It was too much work." "Julia, you're killing yourself. Evening classes, a project during the day, taking care of Emma. It's humanly impossible." "I need to do all of this." "Why?" Because I need to prove that I deserve this opportunity." Richard looked at her with a mix of tenderness and exasperation. "Julia, you don't need to prove anything to anyone. You've already proven your worth long before any of this happened." That night, for the first time, Richard took care of Julia and Emma completely. He prepared dinner, it was a bit burnt but edible, helped Emma with her homework, and put cold compresses on Julia's forehead while she rested. "Why are you doing all this?" Julia asked, watching him awkwardly, yet genuinely fold Emma's clothes. "Because that's what families do. They take care of each other." "Family?" "Yes, the 3 of us. You, me, and Emma. We are a family." March 2025 marked the first anniversary of the day their lives intertwined. And to celebrate, Richard did something that surprised even him. He proposed to Julia. It wasn't an elaborate or formal proposal. It was on a Sunday afternoon, when the 3 were in the apartment Richard had bought for them in Ocean View, a place where Julia could maintain her independence, but where he could be present. "Julia, marry me." She almost dropped the coffee cup she was holding. "What? Marry me, officially. I want us to be a real family." "Richard, I know it's scary. I know you're afraid of losing your independence, but Julia, these last few months have been the happiest of my life. I want to wake up every day knowing that you two are my family." Emma, who was playing with dolls on the living room carpet, looked up. "Mum, if you marry Uncle Richard, will he be my dad?" The innocent question from the girl hit both adults like lightning. "Would you like that, my love?" Julia asked softly. "Very much. Uncle Richard teaches me about dinosaurs and takes me to the museum and always remembers to buy strawberry ice cream for me." Emma smiled brightly. "And he takes care of you when you're tired." "And you take care of him when he forgets to take his medicine," Julia said, looking at Richard. "So we are a family that takes care of each other," Richard concluded. "Yes," Julia replied, finally allowing love to conquer all fears. "We are a family." April brought a simple yet deeply moving ceremony. At the registry office in Ocean View, with Emma as the flower girl carrying the rings, Julia and Richard got married. There was no glamour or pomp, just three people who had found in each other the family they had always sought. And in May, 14 months after that rainy March afternoon that changed everything, they inaugurated the Hope Educational Center, an institution that offered quality education for the children of domestic workers, security guards, doormen, people like Julia who deserved to see their children have the same opportunities as more privileged kids. Julia, now graduated in education with a specialization in inclusive education, stood at the entrance of the center, watching dozens of children enter for their first day of school. Emma, she was among them, no longer as the daughter of the housekeeper, but as the daughter of the educational director and the president of the foundation. "You did it," Richard said, wrapping his arm around his wife's waist. "We did it," she corrected. "The three of us." And as they watched the children running around the playground, laughing and playing, they knew they had built something far more valuable than an educational center. They had created a second chance for hundreds of families, proving that love and determination can break any social barrier, and created a legacy that would last for generations. The girl who saved the life of a powerful man had become the woman who saved his heart, and together they were saving the future of many other children. If you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and if you watched until now, comment "I watched until now" and share your thoughts on this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the final screen. It's very exciting.